Bless you all. In the electric universe theory and electron flood theory, so weird that I'm naming Roger and that from Mud Fossil University after all these years. Anyway, in the electric universe theory, Thunderbolt's project and all that, there's also like an expanding Earth theory. So you got the core and all this stuff and all the layers, the field from the sun. In this dynamic in picture, over time the sun fills the inside of the earth with energy through the surface, through all means, from all directions. And it heats up and stuff. And it starts to expand. Gets bigger. So it might have had like fewer layers, and when you look on the inside it's kind of like orbital rings. And I was thinking, in the theory also, there's a part where the sun may give birth to like more planets, which is interesting. So it in turn is moving through a galactic plane of sorts, and multiple versions of that are all going on relative to all the other galaxies and bodies in there, and the different currents, you could say, of electrical fields, magnetic fields, and their orientations and charges. And it's a lot of let's say like static to pick up if you were a balloon traveling through a place that was covered in jumpers or like sheep's wool. If you were a tiny wee balloon traveling through sheep's wool, there'd be all these wee static shocks. That picture, but on a really big scale, is kind of like what's going on. And that balloon is similar to our electric field. So there's a little gap between us and the Earth's crust, and the air is kind of like an insulating layer between the crust and the cosmos, and we have this electric field around us. We have overlapping fields. We have every field you can imagine, sort of everywhere, kind of, and in point space. And there seems to be an interesting bit, through the layers of the different spheres of atoms and volumes, pressures on the way up from surface to beyond. So the big picture I'm trying to get at is, in the expanding Earth theory, all these layers don't exactly, they do have equilibrium by and large, but the sun is hot as fuck, right? It's much hotter than us, and we're in the Goldilocks zone right now, and the sun will always give off heat for a long period of time, let's say, in our framing, and it goes to colder bodies, and so it comes to us and it warms us up. We get used to it and things like that. Eventually the planets are pushed out further in orbit. They also induce certain spins. Like we all spin, and some of the bodies don't spin in the same way as the plane or of the sun and things like that, which are quite interesting to theorize why things happened. There's a big sort of second planetary body during the early formation of Earth that struck us, and some of the high-res videos of it make it look like part of it is still on the inside here, and the other part became the moon, which is quite interesting when you think of, like say a crystal formation or blob of elements. It's really hot, sort of in a vacuum of. It's not vacuum. It's got the signature of the solar system within the galaxy. But relative to us, we kind of call it the vacuum of space. It's going, and the mass and the things like that, gravity, pulls it all together against its heat, which is trying to push it apart, right? And all sorts. It's also the heat can also push things together, but at this stage you've got two bodies, and it's half molten and half like crusty, and they form two bodies. The moon's tidally locked to us, and then they cool down, you know. So it would be quite interesting to, when you look at a geode on the inside of the rock layers here, they're like solid when it first comes in or whatever, and it could be one type of thing or a conglomerate, like a mixture, and it's all messed. But over time, the forces of nature and the seasonal changes and habits of the outer environments, like affect the stability of certain regions within the atoms and layers of molecules and arrangement of things within the geode, which could just be a geode would be like a more stable deposit within something that's not that, or kind of. I don't know any more explanations than that. But through mineralization, calcification processes, replacement of certain parts of this, if it becomes vitrified, I think that means one type of process happened, and a lot of things are preserved, turned glassy. And if things are, what's the other one? There's vitrification, and then there's trees get weathered, which is interesting. That's what I was sort of thinking about there. Anyway, in a geode, right, so an amethyst crystal or something, you've got them all sticking towards the center, more or less, of the circular geode, or whatever shape this thing is. It can be kind of like an oblong, whatever. Some of them are really big. So a guy across the street that's got a big side slab of one right now. It's about the size of my chest. And it's covered in minerals like this, and there's more on the inside. So they're like two planes like this, and they're sliced in together, and they're grown out of whatever I would presume would be the boundary layer of the geode, or are they called like veins or something? Mineral veins? I don't know. His thing's cool, but it's mostly quartz, and that doesn't form like really thin cylindrical stuff in a vacuum of the layer. Well, it probably does. I just don't know enough about the types. But this was mostly ram-packed. It looked like brain material, you know, like the wrinkles on a brain. You can just see it. It's the side of impression of it looks like this. And this is all quartz, like nodules, and there's little spaces. Over time, those spaces, those are the vacuum spaces that we would see where he has it at the side of the street. But under the ground, they could be filled with any sort of mixture of water that seeps through the layers, and that layer of water can have like hydrocarbons in it. It can be acidic, it can be alkali, like salt water, depending on the amount of time, and it changes the internal compositions of both the vacuum structure there, but the insides of like elemental crystals. So if they're like vacuous structures, I don't know what the actual term is, but let's say they're like water can be exchanged for minerals, if you put it that way, and sometimes you can end up with like inner things, and they become what the fuck am I doing? Little shape stuff with extra dots in them. So it's kind of like more dense, put it that way. It's more dense. They become mineralized, even though it's already mineraled. Think of it like a seashell, right? When it dries out and you find it on the beach, it's really light. It's like porous, like a sponge. Think of a big block of whatever that seashell material would be made out of. And then you dip it in the ocean and it gets wet, it gets heavier. So now it's filled with like salty water. And you pick it up and you set it down somewhere and you turn it to ice, let's say. Okay, make it really cold. First off, it would probably expand and smash the whole porous structure, right? Because ice expands, and salty water ice probably does that too. But if you held it under pressure, like a lot of pressure, the inside of it, while you cool it, the inside of it would try to expand while you crushed it, and the whole thing on the inside would turn to something else, and it would be salt and the type of calcium. Shell's kind of made from like calcium and shit like that. You get limestone, I believe, from there. So it's like a solid version of I don't know what a calcium solution would be. If you grind someone's bones up, like what's the giant, the beanstalk? Fee-fi-fo fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Anyway, this geode thing, right, basically goes through like replacement. And what if the inside of the moon either has huge crystals in it or something else? But yeah. What else was I talking about? So there's lots that happened in the age of the universe. In the electric universe, each planet is pushed away from the sun towards the outer galaxy. And I didn't really look into the theory too much, but I just followed the dynamic, right? We have the Oort cloud, this big smashed up bit of like asteroids. What if they're old planets that got pushed out and then they get smashed up? And here's what I think, right? It's like a training center. So life starts on a planet which is made by the sun out of the dust in the location. Well, it's not necessarily made out of the sun, but it's made out of the electric field surrounding this whatever nearest bodies are there, and the sun probably would have been included in that at the time. It's kind of like made out of like, I don't know. It's something akin to energy, if you get what I'm saying, but in patterns that repeat and have an intelligence and will to seek. I don't know. But the dust in the protoplanetary disk comes together. So it's kind of always connected to that field. It's always been subject to the field. And life starts at some point on the planet. I don't know where the fuck it comes from. But it goes through loads of cataclysms and life changes a bunch of times. It has to improve. And I think a lot of that was probably like bacterial, deep down in the soil layers, feeding off X, Y, and Z. I really do not know. And most of our body is filled with water, and the life in us is prokaryote and eukaryote. You know, like two weird ends of the early spectrum of life. And gut flora, which is that we take on from our environment and from our parents and things like that. So we're like a microcosm for what's outside of us, so that so we don't get ill, basically. So we're kind of like, if you imagine camouflage, like in the Walking Dead, where you put the zombie flesh on you and all the blood and stuff so you can walk through. That's kind of like the environment for like things that are alive. You don't die because you've got a protective layer on all fronts. When you take in things like cell walls and stuff, I guess. And things will recognize what you are. We're not obviously walking zombies or anything. We are what we are. Just an analogy for one layer of things. Like when you go to space, you wear a spacesuit, right? And when you're walking down the street, you wear your normal clothes. But when you go to work, you wear work clothes so that they don't get on at you. They don't start firing you. So you can be identified or misidentified or slip through a crowd or be a crowd or sort of represent something else. But they have social functions or translative functions, let's say. It's broader than social. It's more like a projection of something that is internalized naturally by most things, especially your enemy, to be something else. So it's kind of like in the Art of War or whatever, I think it is, you have to think like your enemy, or you have to know your enemy, you have to think like a criminal to catch a criminal, etc. And why is this relevant to expanding Earth? Because all these layers have boundaries, and I was surprised when I discovered like surfactants and things like that. So like oil is a surfactant, some people call it, that stops, well, it kind of stops frictional forces at that distance. But some of them also don't stop chemical reactions, so there's particular ones. But in most cases, or because in some cases it won't work, you have an extra dynamic or like a meta dynamic that goes on between layers of things, boundaries in nature. It's where like rust forms on the side of metals, oxidized, so the oil would, or whatever you would protect with paint, stops oxygen getting to it. Perhaps it's moisture you don't want there. When you go into a tent, there's a fabric, Gore-Tex, I think it's like stretched so that the width of the polymers or whatever, the length, won't allow water through. I think with control over that sort of mesh type technology, and then you can set plastic quite quickly, you have a lot of expansion going on, so it sets quite quick. You can sort of easily calculate the dimensions that you want it to set at. I think that would be an interesting place. Gore-Tex was here in West Lothian. They operated here. I had to look up some of the patents and things like that and how the discovery went. So the point I'm making is volcanoes and such, right, are kind of like pores that open within the surfactant layers, and these are kind of like bubbles or bellies, like a gas layer, but it could also be a viscous layer. It's just to do with density, volume, temperatures on most sort of dynamic you can have an increase in one or the other. The space in which all the variables line up is in equilibrium, and so one or t'other layers or dimensions gives the energy flows into, say, like the spin of one of the things, or it creates a vortex or whirlpool. Something happens, and like it tries to maintain stability on some level, on all levels really, but things tend to sort of self-sort, and it's probably went, by the time it pushes towards the boundary layer, it's probably went through several things like that on several levels, which we don't even have looks at like proper macro dynamics at this stuff, but at some point that resonates with the other shells. It can't not do it either on most levels, but you would see it like noise with some sort of overtones. And there's such like harmonic resonance and things, and lost in the noise kind of is just heat, right? Because it's energy that's passed on to resonant particles. Why am I doing this? It's true. It keeps you interested. It's all passed on to resonant particles, so it's a dispersion of heat, and that will canalize outwards and inwards through processes. So life has to like go through all of that shit, and if say the universe, the planets are small, and protoplanetary disk is sort of forms into this. Then I'm thinking, like, if there was a protoplanetary disk and we formed and we never came from the sun, where does the disk come from? Would it be from like lots of like forming? Oh wow, when the sun first formed, maybe there was like hundreds of thousands of planets or something that all competed and smashed up and got absorbed and then reabsorbed and sorted into line, and then eventually these stable rings appeared and formed them. Okay, now we're back to where we were at, and things get pushed out in free. What? Okay, so pause like it. I often need to sort of visualize things. So, and or we can go back on track to something I kind of have a through line for. We'll just go through the disks, right, and we'll work out another dynamic at another point. Each planet's pushed along and away from the sun because the sun is heating it up. You follow? Okay. And the planets can make moons because the sun's heating it up to get rid of heat from the inside. And then the distance or some such, like the tidal waves, can kind of create seasons on that planet that help regulate with added complexity, which is a shame because it's well, probably not that it's beautiful, right? But what I'm trying to say is a shame is that, like, in order to look after, say, the heat of the planet, say it was to keep expanding, like fucking space is expanding today, right? Why is that? That means like whatever holds space, like the capacity of space, the capacitor that's charged up, that has like the full value of space in it, of one or whatever, is like overfilling, which is weird. Oh yeah, I had this thought about the Big Bang, right? It all started everywhere at once, but what if it was just like started from a shadow of the future? Because they're like a back and forward thing. So if the future's full of light, when the future looks back through linear time, it sees its own shadow. fact, eh? Right, okay. Um, and then when there's a shadow, there's a difference in temperature between heat and temperature across time, and so and so becomes so. Uh, it's fucked, but I like it. So all these planets, let's just focus on Earth. Imagine we got pushed out into where Jupiter is, because we got so many rings and got huge, and whoa, we're the gas giant now, what happened? Imagine that. Because the big thing in the middle of the solar system is it's swallowing planets and all that stuff, so it's putting more juice into the sun through the electric field or whatever field we're stuck in around it. So I feel like the sun might just keep doing what it's doing for quite a while, like if it's not based on regular internal fusion as we know it. And it probably is, but I think there's probably another underlying thing going on there as well. Where were we at? Right, so we're where Jupiter is at, and Venus is now moving towards or in the Goldilocks zone, and so they're getting cooler, right? So all the elements and molecules that's on Venus. I'm your Venus, I'm your fire, your desire. I think we should go to Venus. Wait. No, Mars is next, isn't it? It goes Mercury. Yeah. Okay. No. Yeah, we're going to Mars because it's going to become better when it goes further away from the sun, I think. And I think that'll be pretty tight. But we need to find out if it's got loads of molecules on it. That have a history, that are all stuck together in forms of big stones and that, we've been here before. Who knows? I don't know. Folk are gonna go check it out. I think it's good to have people on the other planets anyway, just so that if anything bad happens again, obviously it can be sorted. And then right from Jupiter, we go flying out. We become smashed up in the Oort cloud with all the other stones, which would suck. That would suck. What would really suck is if the sun, right, went through cycles like this, booms and busts. So Red Dwarf maybe wasn't like that India and that, and then you've got, what do you call them, the white ins and stuff. The pulsars, they're not quite white, but they always are on the fucking TV or the thingy. They might also have planets of a different sort or something, I don't really know. But they're that's a different epoch, way in the front of the future. So there's this part where there's a red dwarf that blooms out, it goes like a big red star, it gets really fat and it pushes stuff out. If because of the size of our sun it shrinks back in, it could have more planets getting pushed out again. It starts birthing more planets after that. Kind of like when a woman's belly gets big, the kids that already existed get pushed on in life and sort of away, and maybe there's an older one. There was 8 in the bed and the little one said, roll over. So they all rolled over and the one fell out. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it starts again. Lots of nursery rhymes. So I think he rolled over and burst his head. It's quite grim. So that's the Oort cloud for you. That's like Jack and Jill going up the hill to fetch a pail of water. And Jack fell down and broke his croon. And Jill came tumbling after. Where would we get water from? That's mental. A well, of course. Where's the top of the hill? So I quite like hills and that, so that's another nursery rhyme. That's kind of like going to the top of a volcano of sorts, or some sort of spring. of whatever you're trying to get. That bulge in the layers, like I'm saying, like when you release that energy, it's going to release itself, of course, but I think, I don't really know. I do not really know. I'm not in control. I don't ever want to like try and say this is how we should manage it. But thinking that way helps build a picture. So if we end up with like another layer in the crust of the mantle or something like that, it would form out of, who knows? It might look like this, right? So the more rock is created and it spews out all the volcanoes again. Maybe there's a big crack or something, and there's lava everywhere once more, and all the water goes into the atmosphere, maybe, or is used in various gases and things like that. Maybe there's versions of it at high temperature I'm unaware of, but it tends to like outgas, and so it all moves up. Like the planet's surface expands a little bit, kind of like Venus, and the surface below is filled with all the heavy stuff for the inside that got too hot to stay as compact on the inside, so it needed more volume. It expanded. So if this is a heavy inner mantle layer, the outer mantle layer isn't as thick or dense, so it wants to be that. It wants to like, but there's another solid iron ring, or like it's not iron, but it's like a different type. It's probably not even solid, but there's density rings, is what I'm saying. Some of them are fluid and some of them are less fluid. And the ones on the inside are under the most pressure and closest to like the big heat ball that's like getting, inducting through the ring system of moving particles, energy. This is what I take. And so it forms another ring somewhere, and it's at this point it would break through those pores, one layer after another underneath, which might cause like earthquakes above, and then on top of the lava layer on the surface as it's spewing out, if it does that as well, if it gets so bad it covers the whole surface, until pressure equalizes, and say we move part or past a different part of the galactic plane that's no longer doing this, and it makes another crust, so it gets colder again, which is mental to think about. And then you would have another layer, and those bacteria or anything that lives, if there's other forms of life and other forms of structures, like some people think crystals are alive or whatever, or if there's a source that's just life, like pure electricity or something, that would be mental. I'm open to all sorts and I believe nearly nothing, and it helps me think that way. Doesn't get me anywhere in reality really. Well, it does actually. It helps. But I'm not seeking to sort of do anything mental like that. Like, I wouldn't want to make a big power generator. Somebody would steal it and then that would be that. Where was I going with that? Fucking, I didn't again. Expanding Earth theory is mental though. So like, I think some of the epochs, like of folk that understood kind of like a dynamic of that, were trying to either harness that energy out and like store it or do something with it to cool the planet down, or to heat it up again, like depending on whatever. And they do that on different dynamics. Like right now they're trying to say it was carbon dioxide or whatever, and there was like ice ages and impacts and craters, which would be like cooling forms. When that mantle layer underneath the crust recedes, it creates vacuums and stuff like that, and a lot of whatever it is happens to be on this epoch surface, say our planet's like water and hydrocarbons from dead things, life. It seeps through. Some of that's more ancient and more resilient, like these extremophiles, than we ever will be. And under those circumstances, with the layer resets, that's probably what's grown again from. And if there are any other species out there, that they would come down and sort of fuck with that, right? And then wait a long time. Like aliens would come down, or future humans, or it's just life. It's like another far brotherhood. What else? There would be a fuck with the life that way. Yeah, okay, right. So this all happens in the electric universe light filaments. So this is where the electricity sort of is conglomerated into fibers through space. And they're more resistive because basically those filaments are electrolytic in comparison to the voids between the galactic filaments. And those are big empty spaces. They're like black, basically. You can't really see much in there, and they're hard to see. Except when you compare distances and stuff through telescopes, I think, because they cross over. They like superimpose over. So like, if this is a void that's close, this galaxy here makes this look like two voids, if you see me, yeah. And then there's like layers and layers and layers. So when they do the redshift sort of length and brightness tests and stuff, they can work out. It's quite complex, and I think like more data always helps. And I think some of them get rewritten sometimes, but it's all hands on deck for that stuff. And I think eventually it'll be a computer that does it with algos and things, and then we'll get a picture. And then once you get a better algo, you'll get a better picture, and it's collecting things, and then there's so much noise and such. Yeah. So voids, there's voids everywhere, and I think those voids would be where any life, right, they surpass the initial stages. What are the great fillers? The Oort clouds and the ring thing, they would go to they would move into the middle of the filaments, because there would be a boundary between a gradient of heat between the emptiness and the filaments. It's like a polarity, and if you go in there into the center of it, or if you're just in there, there should be an opposite field, or it's, I don't know. It would be more vacuumous, if you get me. Like before, we were talking about vacuums. So I wonder what they're doing, what's happening over there. And they move through each other, I guess, maybe, or perhaps not. Maybe it's only very large energetic movements outside, say, the observational distance of our light sphere since the Big Bang happened. And then space is probably warped all the way up anyway because of black holes. And black holes are like a big crystal form of like a more dense solid, if you get it. So like if space crystallized into an atom or a structure of space-time embedded within a greater dimensional porous structure, say, or something, that would make more sense. which shows there is like an ebb and flow maybe between like another larger structure. There's probably all these dimensions of power that we have on this of force, like magnetism, electromagnetism, nuclear force and things. Most of the particles, they've probably got analogous counterparts, reciprocals on the other side, like the left-hand, right-hand rule Eric Weinstein talks about. Not saying necessarily they're inside black holes, but there probably is a mechanical analogous thing within the black hole system itself, with its own restrictions and diverse cool stuff. Maybe time is something else to that system. Maybe time to that system is the popping of universes, where the universe goes pop, pop, pop. Those little black holes are kind of like inclusions within the porous structure of the multiverse or whatever. And like bubbles on a Mentos sweetie, they can bubble away or they can get stuck to it or something like that, and then they pop. So I wonder if more black holes means our universe is tethering. It's like sticking to a surface more often because of that. So say if you were to align a bunch of black holes in a row, like with a sewing needle stitching machine and make a fabric, you would have you would be making like a line of you'd be stitching yourself into that fabric, into the dynamic of it somehow. It's kind of fucking weird. And then like see when a big black hole is made as well, the bigger it gets, it's kind of strange as well. It's kind of like it's creating a cavity within that structure. No, well, it's making a cavity within our structure actually, but it's also taking matter and energy and it's creating a cavity in space and time, and it's warping gravity. I'm saying a cavity, like it's an inclusion. It's like a volume of space with like a hole, like a jar, like a bell light. It's like a mouth and a set of lungs that's going, but it never really closes until, well, I don't know. I think there's this equilibrium state in black holes where its orbital range or something falls within the horizon, so that anything that's on the outside no longer experiences a draw towards it, and it sort of just orbits it. Unless it gets hit directly by another black hole or large mass, like they can fly in at certain velocities and angles, but all the stuff that was coming towards it to start with tends not to. And so there's these zones around black holes as well that have a totally different time zone. It works on different length scale compared to us we're not as close. So if we were to be closer to the center of the galaxy, let's say, and be cool with that, so if we could fly this ship, I'm going to say the solar system, towards the center of the galaxy somehow, right, upstream of the filaments, we would be working against time and we would live longer. Just a thought. But it is relative. What would be living longer than? It would just be the outside of the universe. Would you want that, or would you want to get out into space? If you wanted the planet to stop expanding and you wanted to dim the energy of the system, you would want to get a bit further away. If you wanted to up it, you want to be a bit closer, I would guess. But the closer you, I'm not really sure. Sometimes I get the inverses like swapped round, but the The little dynamics are interesting there. Anyway, I'm going to stop right now because it's been 45 minutes and I've been rambling for ages, and I just kind of wanted to ramble about some theory I seen on the internet that was about Earth and expansion. Plate tectonics is involved in this. You kind of thingy separate like a football that you overinflate, and the patchwork sort of goes psst. Yeah. Deckment Hill is kind of like a big, it's one of those surface push-ups, and a lot of hills are that as well. And a bit chicken shit.